Lena Hart was 39 years old when she finally learned how quiet strength could sound louder than any insult ever thrown at her. She lived in a peaceful-looking American suburb where every lawn was trimmed to the same height and every mailbox stood straight like it had been trained. To the neighbors, Lena was simply the talented interior designer with a warm smile and the clean white car parked in the driveway. But inside her small home, her world was built around her mother, Rosa Hart, a woman with tired hands and a gentle laugh that came from years of cleaning other people's houses to make sure her daughter could dream of something bigger. One morning, as Lena poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs, Rosa teased her, "You always buy the expensive beans, even when you say you're saving money." Lena laughed and leaned against the counter. "Mom, after everything you did for me, good coffee is the least I can afford." Rosa shook her head with a smile. "I didn't clean floors so you could spoil me. I did it so you could stand tall." Those words stayed with Lena as she stared out the window, watching the quiet street wake up, unaware that her own life was about to face the kind of storm that no neat neighborhood could ever hide. Lena met Julian Crest at a charity art event downtown, where soft music floated through a glass-walled gallery and waiters moved like shadows with trays of sparkling drinks. Julian stood out in his sharp suit and calm confidence, like someone who had never doubted his place in the room. When he introduced himself, his voice was smooth and polite. "Julian Crest," he said, offering his hand. "I hear you designed the lighting for this place." Lena smiled, surprised he had noticed. "I did. I wanted it to feel warm, not cold." Julian nodded. "It does. My mother would say warmth is a luxury." Lena didn't understand that comment at the time. Over the next months, Julian took her to elegant dinners, long drives by the coast, and quiet evenings where he spoke about his family's history like it was a legend carved in stone. "The Crests have been here for generations," he told her once, gazing at an old family photo on his phone. Lena listened with curiosity, sharing stories of her mother's long days and simple joys. Julian smiled politely, but sometimes his eyes drifted away, as if those stories belonged to a world he couldn't quite step into. Still, when he asked her to marry him under a sky full of fireworks, Lena said yes, believing love could build a bridge between any 2 lives. Moving into the Crest family's grand home felt like walking into a museum where Lena was never sure if she was allowed to touch anything. The walls were lined with old portraits, and every room smelled faintly of polished wood and quiet rules. Julian's mother, Margaret Crest, greeted Lena with a thin smile that never reached her eyes. "Welcome," Margaret said, her voice sweet but careful. "I hope you'll find our home suitable." Lena nodded, trying to ignore the way the word suitable landed between them. At dinner, Margaret asked questions that felt more like tests. "So, Lena, where did your mother learn housekeeping?" she asked, slicing her food slowly. Lena paused. "She learned by doing. She worked very hard." Julian chuckled lightly. "You know how Mom is always curious." But Lena noticed he didn't correct his mother. Later that night, in their bedroom, Lena asked, "Do you think your mom likes me?" Julian shrugged, loosening his tie. "She just needs time. She's used to things being a certain way." Lena lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what a certain way really meant. As the months passed, the small comments grew sharper, like thorns hidden inside soft words. Margaret would praise Lena's designs and then add, "It's impressive, considering where you come from." At family gatherings, Julian would joke about Lena's childhood in front of relatives. "She didn't even know what a wine opener was when we met," he laughed once. The room filled with polite laughter, and Lena forced a smile that felt like it was glued to her face. One evening, as they drove home, Lena finally spoke. "Julian, it hurts when you say things like that." He sighed, gripping the steering wheel. "You're too sensitive. They're just jokes." Lena looked out the window, watching the city lights blur. She thought of her mother's quiet pride and wondered how something so gentle could be made to feel so small. Still, she kept working, kept designing, kept bringing her own money and ideas into their life, hoping one day her effort would be seen as more than just a background detail. The night of Julian's promotion party was meant to be a celebration of success, but it became the moment everything changed. The Crest home filled with guests in fine clothes and loud laughter. Lena walked in with Rosa by her side, her mother wearing a simple blue dress and holding her purse tightly, like a shield. "You look beautiful, Mom," Lena whispered. Rosa smiled nervously. "I hope I don't spill anything." As dinner began, Julian stood up to give a speech. He thanked his boss, his colleagues, and finally his family. Then his eyes landed on Rosa. "And I suppose we should thank Lena's mother," he said, smirking. "After all, someone has to keep things clean around here." A few guests laughed awkwardly. Julian added, louder this time, "Why don't you take your plate to the kitchen? You'll be more comfortable there. The dog usually eats there too." The room went silent. Rosa froze, her hands shaking. Lena felt a calm rise inside her, cold and steady. She stood up slowly. "No, Julian," she said clearly. "Tonight, everyone is going to hear the truth." The room seemed to shrink around Lena as every face turned toward her. Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out at first. Lena looked at her mother, who stood frozen near the table, and gently took Rosa's hand. "Mom, sit here," Lena said, pulling out a chair beside her. Rosa whispered, "Lena, it's okay, don't make trouble." Lena shook her head. "No, it's not okay." She turned back to the guests, her voice steady. "You all see my mother as a cleaner, a background figure in your beautiful homes. But 22 years ago, when this family nearly lost everything, it was my mother who cleaned Margaret Crest's house for months without being paid on time, just so their lights could stay on and their reputation could stay shiny." A soft gasp moved through the room. Margaret's face went pale. "That's a lie," she snapped. Lena met her eyes. "You know it's not. You cried at our kitchen table when the bank called you every morning." The silence grew heavy, like thick air before a storm. Julian finally found his voice. "Lena, stop. You're embarrassing everyone." Lena looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something inside her settle. "No, Julian. I've been embarrassed for years, and I stayed quiet. Tonight, I'm done." She turned back to the guests. "You praise this house, these walls, these floors. Let me tell you something. I paid for the last renovation. Every light fixture, every painted wall, every soft rug you admire. I designed and funded them." Murmurs rippled across the room. One of Julian's colleagues whispered, "Is that true?" Lena nodded. "And when Julian's firm was about to collapse last year, I used my savings to keep it alive. I told everyone it was a miracle contract. It wasn't. It was me." Julian stepped back like the ground had shifted under him. "Why would you say this?" he asked quietly. Lena replied, "Because I'm tired of pretending I'm less than I am." Margaret gripped the edge of the table, her voice sharp. "You should be grateful. This family gave you a name, a place, a future." Lena smiled sadly. "No, Margaret. I gave myself a future. My mother gave me a backbone." Rosa squeezed Lena's hand, tears in her eyes. A guest near the door cleared his throat. "Julian, is this true about the firm?" Julian looked down, unable to answer. The room buzzed with whispers now, like bees trapped in glass. Lena took a breath and added softly, "And one more thing. Julian's assistant, Mia, didn't go to therapy because she was stressed from work. She went because she was involved with my husband, and I paid for her to get help instead of making a scandal." A shocked silence fell. Someone dropped a fork. Julian's face turned red, then white. "Lena, please," he whispered. But Lena had already said everything she came to say. Guests began to leave, one by one, offering awkward nods and quiet goodbyes. Julian's boss pulled him aside near the doorway. "We'll talk on Monday," he said firmly. Margaret stood in the center of the room, looking smaller than Lena had ever seen her. Rosa leaned close to her daughter. "Let's go home," she whispered. Lena nodded. As they stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around them like a blanket. Rosa finally spoke. "I never wanted to be the reason for a fight." Lena smiled gently. "You're not the reason. You're the reason I finally spoke." They drove away from the glowing house, leaving behind the echoes of a life that no longer fit. The days that followed felt strangely quiet. Julian's calls went unanswered. Margaret's messages piled up on Lena's phone, each one softer than the last. Lena focused on her work, meeting clients, sketching new designs, and coming home to evenings filled with Rosa's laughter and the smell of simple home-cooked meals. One afternoon, Julian showed up at the door, eyes tired. "Can we talk?" he asked. Lena stepped outside, closing the door behind her. "You can talk," she said. "I'm just not promising to listen the way I used to." Julian ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't know how to stop it. The jokes, the comments. It was just how my family is." Lena replied calmly, "That's not an excuse. It's a choice." Julian looked down at the pavement. "What do you want?" Lena answered, "Respect. And I can't beg for that anymore." The divorce papers were signed quietly in a small office with beige walls and ticking clocks. Julian sat across from Lena, avoiding her eyes. The lawyer explained the terms, but Lena already knew them by heart. She took only what she had put in, her savings, her designs, her share of the home improvements. Julian finally looked up. "You could take more," he said softly. Lena shook her head. "I don't want anything that comes with your family's shadow." When they stood to leave, Julian hesitated. "I did love you," he said. Lena paused at the door. "I know, but love shouldn't make you feel small." She walked out into the sunlight, feeling lighter with every step. Rosa moved in with Lena by choice, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because they both enjoyed the simple comfort of being together. Their new home was smaller than the Crest mansion, but it felt warmer. One morning, Rosa sat at the kitchen table, watching Lena work on a new design. "You know," Rosa said, "I used to think power was money." Lena smiled. "What do you think now?" Rosa tapped her chest. "I think it's this. Knowing who you are even when no one else sees it." Lena nodded, saving her design. "That's the kind of house I want to keep building." Julian's life shifted quickly. His firm placed him on leave, and whispers followed him into every room he entered. Margaret called Lena one evening, her voice trembling. "I just want to talk," she said. Lena considered hanging up, but instead she answered, "Then talk." Margaret paused. "I didn't know how to be anything other than what I was taught. Strength meant never showing weakness." Lena replied gently, "Strength can also mean admitting when you're wrong." There was a long silence. "Can you forgive me?" Margaret finally asked. Lena closed her eyes. "Forgiveness doesn't mean going back. It just means moving forward without carrying the weight." Lena's career began to rise in ways she hadn't expected. Clients admired not just her designs, but her story. One woman told her, "You don't just design rooms. You design courage." Lena laughed, embarrassed but proud. She started mentoring young designers, especially those who came from backgrounds like hers. "Don't wait for someone to give you a seat at the table," she told them. "Build your own." Rosa often sat in the back of these meetings, listening quietly, her eyes shining. One rainy afternoon, Lena found an old photo in a box of memories. It showed her and Julian on their wedding day, both smiling, unaware of what the future held. Rosa looked at it over Lena's shoulder. "You were happy," she said. Lena nodded. "I was. And I don't regret loving him. I just won't regret leaving either." She placed the photo back in the box, closing the lid gently, like saying goodbye to a chapter that had already been read. The dog that once sat quietly in the Crest kitchen now stretched comfortably on Lena's couch, tail wagging as Rosa scratched behind its ears. "Look at you," Rosa laughed. "You've got the best seat in the house now." Lena smiled at the simple joy of the moment. The living room wasn't fancy, but it was full of light and warmth, and that felt like more than enough. One evening, Lena and Rosa sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the rooftops. Rosa broke the silence. "Do you think people ever really change?" Lena thought for a moment. "I think people change when they want to, not when they're forced to." Rosa nodded slowly. "You changed." Lena smiled. "I just stopped hiding who I already was." Julian sent one last letter, short and simple. He thanked Lena for showing him a truth he hadn't wanted to see. Lena read it once and placed it in a drawer. She didn't feel anger anymore, just a quiet understanding that some lessons come only after something is lost. Lena stood in her latest finished home, sunlight pouring through wide windows onto walls she had painted herself. A client admired the space. "It feels honest," the woman said. Lena smiled. "That's the best kind of design." Rosa watched from the doorway, pride written across her face. As night fell, Lena and Rosa sat together, the dog curled between them, the world outside calm and steady. Lena looked around her home and felt something deeper than victory. She felt peace. The kind that comes not from proving others wrong, but from finally choosing herself. In the quiet room, with her mother's soft laughter and the gentle rise and fall of the dog's breathing, Lena knew she had built something no one could ever take away, her dignity, her truth, and a life designed on her own terms. Life after the storm settled into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar to Lena. Mornings began with the soft hum of the coffee maker and Rosa's quiet singing from the kitchen, old tunes from her younger days that carried memories of long bus rides and early work shifts. Lena often sat at the table, sketchbook open, listening to her mother's voice as lines and shapes formed into rooms that didn't yet exist. One morning, Rosa looked over her shoulder and asked, "Who is this one for?" Lena smiled. "A young couple. They want their first home to feel like a promise." Rosa nodded thoughtfully. "Then make it strong. Promises need strong walls." Lena laughed, but she wrote the words down in the corner of her page. Even now, her mother's simple wisdom still shaped the way she built not just houses, but moments, memories, and small pieces of hope for people she barely knew. One afternoon, a familiar car pulled up outside Lena's home. It was Mia, Julian's former assistant. She stood at the door, nervous, twisting her hands together. "I didn't know if you'd want to see me," Mia said. Lena stepped aside. "Come in." They sat across from each other in the living room, the dog resting at Lena's feet. Mia took a deep breath. "I wanted to thank you. For the therapy. For not turning my worst mistake into a public punishment." Lena listened quietly. "We all make choices we regret," she said. "What matters is what we learn after." Mia's eyes filled with tears. "I'm trying to do better." Lena nodded. "That's all anyone can really do." When Mia left, Lena felt a strange sense of closure, like a door gently clicking shut instead of being slammed. Margaret called again weeks later, this time asking to meet in a small cafe near the edge of town, far from polished dining rooms and quiet servants. When Lena arrived, Margaret stood up slowly, her posture less rigid than before. They ordered tea and sat in silence for a moment. "I never thanked you, Mother," Margaret finally said. Lena raised an eyebrow. "For what?" Margaret looked down at her cup. "For helping me when I had nothing. I was too proud to admit it back then." Lena considered her words. "You can thank her now." Later that evening, Rosa answered the phone, listening quietly as Margaret spoke. When the call ended, Rosa sighed. "It took her long enough," she said gently. Lena hugged her, feeling that some old weight had finally been set down. Lena's work began to take her to places she had only seen in magazines before. She traveled to small towns and big cities, turning empty spaces into homes filled with color, light, and stories. At one workshop, a young girl approached her and said, "I want to be like you when I grow up." Lena knelt down to her level. "Be better," she said with a smile. "Be kinder, and don't let anyone tell you where you belong." That night, in her hotel room, Lena called Rosa. "You would have loved today," she said. Rosa laughed through the phone. "I love every day you find your way." Years later, on a quiet evening much like the one that started everything, Lena and Rosa sat together on the porch, watching the stars slowly appear. The dog, older now, rested peacefully at their feet. Rosa leaned back in her chair and said, "You know, I used to think my life was just cleaning up after other people." Lena reached for her hand. "You were building mine." Rosa smiled, eyes shining in the soft light. Lena looked up at the sky and felt grateful for every hard moment that had led her here. She had learned that dignity didn't need to shout, and strength didn't need an audience. In the quiet of her own home, surrounded by love and simple peace, Lena knew her story would live on not as a tale of revenge, but as one of respect, growth, and the gentle power of choosing a better way. The seasons turned, and Lena began to notice how much her life felt like one of the spaces she designed, open, breathing, and filled with light. Spring brought fresh projects and new faces, young designers who came to her studio with nervous smiles and big dreams. One of them, a quiet boy named Aaron, once asked, "How do you know when a design is finished?" Lena thought for a moment before answering, "When it feels like it belongs to the people who will live in it, not to me." Aaron nodded, writing it down carefully, as if it were a rule for life itself. Later that day, Rosa brought lunch to the studio, setting sandwiches on the table for everyone. "You all work too hard," she said with a playful scold. The room filled with laughter, and Lena realized how far she had come from the halls where she once felt like she didn't belong. One evening, Lena received an invitation to speak at a community center in her old neighborhood, the place where she had grown up watching her mother leave before sunrise and return after dark. The room was small, the chairs mismatched, but the faces were eager. Lena stood at the front, hands clasped. "I didn't start with much," she told them. "I started with a mother who believed I could be more than what the world expected." A woman in the crowd raised her hand. "What do you do when people try to make you feel small?" Lena smiled softly. "You don't argue with them. You build something so strong inside yourself that their words can't reach it." Rosa sat in the back row, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Julian's name came up only rarely now, usually in passing conversation or quiet news articles about changes in his firm. One day, Lena saw him from across a busy street. He looked older, his steps slower. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Julian raised a hand in a small, uncertain wave. Lena returned it, not with sadness or anger, but with acceptance. When the light changed, they walked in opposite directions, each carrying a different version of the same past. Rosa's health began to slow her down, though her spirit stayed as bright as ever. Some afternoons, Lena sat beside her on the couch, listening to stories about people whose houses Rosa had cleaned years ago. "They had a piano they never played," Rosa said once, laughing. "Such a waste of a good song." Lena leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "You played your song," she whispered. Rosa squeezed her hand. "So did you." The dog rested nearby, a quiet guardian of their shared memories. On a warm summer night, Lena stood alone in her garden, looking at the home she had built piece by piece, choice by choice. The windows glowed softly behind her, and Rosa's laughter drifted through the open door. Lena closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the steady beat of a life lived on her own terms. She understood now that her story was not about the family she married into, or the hurt she had endured, but about the love she carried forward. With a peaceful smile, she turned back toward the light, knowing that every step she took from here on would be guided not by fear or pride, but by the quiet, unshakable strength of dignity and compassion.